All right, we can get started here. Hello, everybody. My name is Alyssa. I am a conservation director with Conservation Nebraska. Just wanted to quick remind everybody that everyone is by default muted and your cameras are off. So if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box. I will field them. And if you have any specific questions as we go along, I can give those to Dennis, and then at the end we'll have a whole Q&A section. And so before this ends, I'm going to send out a poll to everybody, and I would really appreciate it if everybody could fill that out. It helps us figure out what you guys want to see in the future and help us do a better job of giving you the information that you'd like to hear. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dennis Ferraro. He is a resident herpetologist and professor of conservation biology at the University of Nebraska School of Natural Resources. He has been a UNL faculty member since 1990, and he focuses on the conservation of amphibians, reptiles, and turtles in North America. You can see him answering questions about wildlife conflicts and damage control on his Extension Wildlife Specialist role on the Backyard Farmer Show, airing on Nebraska Public TV. He is one of the founders and leaders of Nebraska's Master Naturalist Program, and he presents at the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission Annual Outdoor Expo and many other things. And I'm going to pass it on over to Professor Dennis Ferraro.
Hi, how are you? So, I was asked to talk about herpetofauna and wetlands or aquatic situations, which is pretty much a integral part of the ecosystem. Most amphibians, and that's what we'll start with, need wetlands. Without wetlands, amphibians wouldn't exist, and so it's a ecosystem biodiversity link of ecology between the two. First, a little bit of background, just to get everybody on the same page about amphibians, and one of the biggest things they do for us is their bioindicators. The reason they're bioindicators, and I'll go through these a little more in depth, but just to go through them quickly for you, they have a semi-permeable membrane for skin. It's not a skin like us, it's not a shell, it's not scales. They breathe through their skin, and their skin must be wet or in an aqueous solution for them to respirate. So a good part of their O2 in and a good part of their CO2 out is through their skin. Very few amphibians utilize their lungs for this function. In fact, most salamanders are lungless. Even though some frogs have lungs, that's mainly for CO2 coming out, not for O2 in. And that's what we call cutaneous respiration. They have an amphibious life because they have to stay wet. They're in and out of wetlands in aquatic situations. They have a permeable egg shell, no amniotic egg, but it has a permeable coating, which is a gel, which holds water around the embryo. They can absorb through their skin or in the egg form toxicants, which make them a great canary in the mine when we come to toxicants in the environment. Hence why they're thought to be the best bioindicators for a amphibious or terrestrial and aquatic area. The other part, the reason why they're very important, their intrinsic value is that they eat massive amounts of arthropods, and because of that, they can bring in small amounts of toxicants that tell us a lot, but they can also be a very important part of the ecology of the wetland. And many things eat them. So they're food for a lot of things. So again, important part, intricate value in of that. And we're going to talk about at the end the movement that they do of energy from the aquatic system to the terrestrial system and back from the terrestrial system to aquatic system. So this is from Wake and Vermenberg in 2008, and it just shows the percentage of amphibians in each country that are threatened, endangered, or critically endangered. And as you can see, it's pretty massive. And this is kind of telling us things because they're bioindicators. And there was an excellent paper that was in American Scientist right before COVID, I think March of 18, where they overlaid where we're having amphibians disappear And amphibians, as far as a class of vertebrates, is probably number one in becoming threatened and extinct than any other group or class of animals, amphibians. And when they overlay that where mammals, including ourselves, are getting resurges in diseases or new diseases, it was almost a perfect overlay. And so amphibians, being ectotherms and having a nucleated blood cell, don't get the same diseases as us. But there's something in the environment that's curtailing and attributing to their immune system not to be working to its best ability, that is later attributing to mammals and ourselves immune systems not to fight off these environmental problems, whether they're androgenic or not. So as bioindicators, let's first look at these first three things, and I'm just going to go forward here. So the integument or skin of a amphibian is much more surface area to volume area than any other type of animal. They're small volume, but a large amount of skin. It's semi-permeable, so oxygen and toxicants and CO2 can cross that barrier very easily, and ions can cross that barrier. Amphibians, being 70 to 80% water, a little more than most other animals, they fight constantly not to overhydrate or fill with water, or dehydrate and become less water in the body. So it's a fight with osmosis and homeostasis. So if the ions in the water are too much, then they will rush into the body. And say you put an amphibian in distilled water, something amphibian keepers need to know. You don't put a frog in deionized water with nothing to put ions in there, or the frog will look like a Michelin doughboy and just blow up because the water rushes in the body. Fastest way to kill a frog. But because most of the distilled water has some ions, that's not much of a problem. Or if you have an aquarium with anything as a substrate, soil, rock, or sand, that adds those ions back into the water. And so we don't see it as often in the pet trade. The other thing, they have a heavy influx of water when their ions are not built up in their body. And their kidney, which is called a mesophrenic kidney, is a very primitive kidney, is very good at holding the ions in, but it's extremely inefficient at holding water in. So they lose a lot of water through their skin, even though they need to keep that. And this is a problem for terrestrial amphibians more than aquatic amphibians. And then, as I was talking, cutaneous respiration. This salamander is a Plotodon salamander, lungless. More salamanders are lungless than those that have lungs, and those that have lungs are very inefficient. So this animal that you're seeing the picture of, 100% of the O2 in and 100% of the CO2 out for respiration is done on the skin. So if something thickens their skin or causes ulcers on their skin or doesn't allow water to bead on their skin with the mucus, they suffocate and die. And if anything can get through small ions through their skin, that changes the homeostasis or osmotic pressure in their body, and they can die from that. So that's why one of the reasons we call them bioindicators of the aquatic situation. One important thing to know is because of that semi-permeable membrane for skin, amphibians out of water will continuously lose water through evaporation. We can have 99% relative humidity, that just lowers the rate. They're still losing a little water through their skin. If they're in water, then they won't lose any, but they can also gain more than they want if the ions are not balanced. So an amphibian has to constantly keep its skin wet for respiration, it has antifungal and antibacterial in its mucus, which helps it keep its skin in pristine form, But if something in the outside, an agent that they're not used to, kills the bacteria on their integument or skin, or kills the fungus, or adds to that antifungus on their skin, then they can go into respiratory distress. And if any ions get on them that are impurities that we normally not in the environment, whether they're in the water, in the rain, or in the soil, those can rush in the body and change their osmotic pressure. So what do amphibians do because of all this? They live close to the water or partly in the water. They have nocturnal activities where they won't dry out. They hide under things in the water and next to the water. They will burrow into soil that has moisture. So this year they're really burrowing deep, or they're next to water where, if there is water left in the Platte or wherever they're at. And they pick microhabitats that allow them to pull in water. Because remember, there's no amphibian that drinks orally. So an amphibian can't go up to a glass of water or a pond of water and suck it up. All amphibians drink through their skin. So they breathe through their skin, osmotic pressure through their skin. Excuse me. And they drink through their skin. So they have to choose, if they can't sit or place their body in the water to bring water into their body, they need to be on soil that has large particle size, like sand. Of course, large particle size means less water, but it also means less tension. So they go for soils that are not clay-like, may have some silt, but preferably have at least 50% larger particles like sand. This allows them to pull the water by having capillaries near their body. So here we're looking at two anurans, or what you may call toads, but they're terrestrial anurans, so they're usually on the land quite a bit. But they have a harder coating of stratoscorium over their skin, but they still have to suck the skin in. So on, so to speak, underneath, we call it the pelvic seat. So it's the underside, kind of their butt. It's very thin, the skin there, and there's capillaries in that area. And they push that against the soil, and they pick up the water out of the soil into lymph glands that are in that back end. So when you pick up a toad and all this moisture or water gets in your hand due to defense, that's not urine. They don't have urine like that. And these are from not urinary bladders, but lymph glands that hold their water. So toads don't pee on you, they release their canteen on you, which is detrimental, but it's supposed to save their life. So what they do, if it's really a problem and not much water, they have a lot of warts on their body. These here are defense warts, but they have other warts on their body, and so when in the morning comes and there could be possible dew, their body's at different temperature, and the warts will channel the dew down to this pelvic seat to allow them to suck up the water and drink. So, little information there on how reliable amphibians are on wet, hydric soil, and therefore wetlands. Okay, we went through those. The egg. Again, you have an embryo in coatings of polysaccharide material that causes, actually, it holds water, it holds moisture, it's antifungal, and so it's supposed to protect them somewhat from predators, but some predators like to eat their eggs. But the thing about amphibian eggs, most of them float, unlike fish eggs that are attached to different weeds. Most amphibian eggs float. So not only are the embryos in the center, while they're developing, getting any toxicants from the water through this gel, getting any toxicants that dissolve on the surface from the air, but also the embryo is getting bombarded by UV light. So if they're in an area where there's a lot of intense UV light, that may not have been there because of different changes in the atmosphere, they now have their embryos being harmed by something that is not something they evolved with, a certain amount of UV light. So again, why they are indicator species of many different attributes of the environment for us. And again, this is leopard frog eggs that have to be northern leopard frog eggs. Here we have our woodhouse toad eggs, and this is also woodhouse toad eggs, but these they have a thing called Camelema algae on it. So there's a component in the gel that makes this algae grow, and this algal growth actually adds oxygen to the embryos. So again, the eggs are adding to the growth of a oxygenating algal growth in the aquatic situation. So here you have a symbiotic relationship between this aquatic situation and the growth of the eggs. Again, very integral part of a wetland. Now these are eggs that have been hit by some kind of toxicant. I grabbed these from a file I had, and I'm sorry I don't have I didn't have time to find where I got them. I have to get to my metadata. But I can tell you I didn't take these, and they were from another researcher who found these eggs that just because of a small amount of, or change in pH, or a small amount of road salts, I think this one is the one, and I think this was Tegmeyer was the student who did this for me, took this picture, and those road salts are causing a lot of different ions to get into the egg mass, and this will probably kill those eggs or dehydrate those eggs. So again, the eggs are also a bio indicator of the integrity of the water. So we get through that. Let's look at other things about them, such as toxicants. So over the years, all the way since the 86 is when the first indication of multiple or maldeformities in amphibians, mainly anurans or frogs, occurred, was actually Minnesota. Josie Crump, I believe, was the 5th grader's name who found the first one. She became a herpetologist. But she sounded alarmed that something was happening. And we didn't know if these multiple legs were due to a toxicant, a pesticide, a fungicide, some kind of odd chemical that's getting in the water. We later found out that, especially in the Midwest, Minnesota, South Dakota, and Nebraska, when we find multiple numbers of anurans with these malformations of multiple legs, and I get about 2 or 3 a year, it's because phosphates in those ponds from usually CAFOs, which is confined cattle operations, are increasing the phosphates, or might be runoff from a reuse pit from agriculture. But the ponds have a lot of phosphates and nitrates, and they're really eutrophic. And because of that, the snail load is quadruple when we count it, at least quadruple, if not, octadruple, 6 times the amount of snails. Well, there's a trematode that has an intermediate host as a snail. If that trematode gets into the tadpole when it is developing, it causes these multiple limbs. So the phosphates, increased phosphates and nitrates, increases the algal growth, increases the snails, increases the the parasite load, the trematode, and that's how we're getting these frogs. And there's been several studies of that, and it's pretty certain for those around the Midwest, that's the only place we're finding them, or the primary place we're finding these malformations. And here's some pictures of the malformations. Here's a picture of the trematode, and the life cycle here of that. So again, finding the legs says, wait a minute, there's a pond around here that is way out of whack with algal growth, possibly due to phosphates and nitrates. Mainly, I think we see more phosphates. Another study done back in the late 90s by Tyrone Hayes from Berkeley. He looked at atrazine in the development of leopard frogs, and he used 0.1 part per billion, which was at the time, and I think it still is, the amount allowed of atrazine in drinking water by ourselves. And his lab experiments showed that if the tadpoles, male tadpoles, or the ones that would be males, were exposed to water with this small amount of atrazine, 36% of the males had non-functional testes. And when he was sent 100 frogs, males, we thought were males, from York County, Nebraska, 28% of those frogs had testes like this versus like that. In York County, as well as that part of Nebraska, atrazine in the ponds is definitely above 0.1 part per billion. So not only is this being shown in the lab, we have indications in our own state of this occurring from that toxicant. So again, something that's happening, but again, it's giving us an alarm about the water in our wetlands. There's a study done in 2013 that looked at other types of pollution, primarily stuff coming off of roads, and mortality on tadpoles, eggs, and frogs. And I'm not going to go through the study. It's pretty elaborate, but it modeled how amphibians at all stages are affected by pollutants and can tell us a lot about the water quality. So, with that said, we're losing amphibians. What is their natural ecological importance in a wetland? Well, they eat a lot of insects, and they get eaten by a lot of things. As larvae, they're primarily herbivores, all except for one anurin, or frog, the plain spadefoot in Nebraska, and one salamander in Nebraska, the western tiger salamander. Both of those are omnivorous. All the rest of our 11 tadpoles in Nebraska are filter feeders and herbivores. When they go through stage 42 of development, their digestive system, which is a big curl, turns into a long carnivore digestive system in one point of development. So they go from being an obligatory herbivore, and all amphibians alive today are obligatory carnivores. There are no vegetarian frogs, salamanders, or caecilians. All amphibians, adults, are 100% carnivores. So as larvae, they're filter feeding plant material and some animal material. So that's adding into that animal in the aquatic situation. So a lot of energy input into these animals comes from the aquatic growth, the plankton type growth, and the zooplankton in the ponds. When they transform to adults, here's how they filter feed, sorry. There they are, making a hole and making these tadpoles are whirling the substrate, so all the little pieces of zooplankton and phytoplankton become suspended so they can take it out. As adults, as larvae, these are tiger salamander larvae. You can see by their little appendages there and their little gills. They are food for insects, fish, and a lot of other aquatic biodiversity. And so they're eaten, and some of that biodiversity may stay in the aquatic system, and some of that biodiversity may go into the terrestrial system. When they change into adult and become somewhat terrestrial, then they're food for terrestrial biodiversity in the landscape. And frogs and salamanders have very little defense, especially salamanders, and most animals really like to eat them. And there are strategists, so there's plenty of them when they metamorphose, so it's a big food mass. In the Appalachian range of North America, salamanders are a very important biomass and almost a keystone species of biomass in the Appalachian range, since insects, birds, reptiles, other amphibians, and small mammals like shrews feed on those amphibians. So they're bringing things in. And if this heron eats 100 frogs, which is not out of the question, and those 100 frogs were 200 tadpoles that were in the aquatic system absorbing toxicants, then that bioaccumulation that stays within them now is attacking these wetland species. So again, that what happens to the amphibians goes up the chain, that tenfold chain to other animals. There's been a lot of studies showing that amphibians do travel quite wide, especially when it rains and especially at night, from their aquatic beginnings. So in both of these, you can see the number of meters that amphibians are traveling. Their core habitat out here, as you can see, is almost 300 meters from the wetland. And in the stream here, our core stream, you can look, this is a great study by Raymond here, and you can see their core habitat right here is about 30 to 60 meters from the stream. So they're bringing whatever's in the stream or the aquatic wetland into the terrestrial landscape. So they're bringing energy, which is good, that's part of the system, but they're also bringing any toxicants that could be in that area. And because they return annually to the aquatic situation to reproduce, they're also bringing what they can pick up in, say, their core buffer here, or terrestrial buffer, back to there. So again, this is showing the same movement in an agricultural situation in Iowa. Another good paper if you want to read more about these occurrences. I'd probably be remiss if I wouldn't talk about one of our two caudata, or salamanders, in the state of Nebraska. We have the smallmouth salamander, and we have the western tiger salamander. No, we do not have the eastern tiger salamander in Nebraska. The western tiger salamander at times has been called the barred or the blotch. I have an issue with that. These two came from the same egg mass. My friends say, oh, this is a barred, this is a blotch. They're from the same mother and father. It's variation. And this one here is from the same pond, I believe is this one or this one, I can't remember which one. But again, look much different. But besides that, I've been working on these for the last 20 years. And every year I have students and master naturalists, great volunteers. There's over 600 trained Nebraska master naturalists right now. But we put traps out for 3 months, and we duplicate it across the state. And so this is the last 2 years of data. However, these zeros have been the same for the last 17 years. We have not found a barred or blotched or any western tiger salamander in these counties for approximately 7 to 10 years, not 17. 17 years ago, my data shows I was finding tiger salamanders, western tiger salamanders, in these areas. So why did all of a sudden they disappear? These animals live 25 years in adult stage. They reproduce fairly, their fecundity is fairly high when they reproduce. They're an R strategist. This year alone, we had positives in our 75 traps per county, and as you can see, we got well over 100 in these. We just stopped counting at 50. And even Keith County at Cedar Point, we got 27. And we're using the same trapping methods, several methods across in both areas as a control. So where they are existing, no problem. Why did they disappear from here? And if you can see all these posters behind me, I have 5 students doing research on all different reasons. And we have some data, and we found out it could be pH, it's not nitrates, it's not atrazine, it's not insecticides, but we're still looking at all sorts of possibilities why we can't find them in this area. We're finding them up here. We're finding them over to Nance and Merritt. I don't think we have good data from Howard yet, but this is 5 years of data, and this is the average of 5 years of data as well. So, and we're also, of course, raising them from eggs in the lab because we want to make sure they're pristine, and no one says, well, what if they were exposed to something different out in the field? So we raise them from eggs. We have to get the eggs from the field, unfortunately, because that's a long story. And then we raise them all the way up to adults and then do all our testing. Okay, any questions? Do we have any questions, Alyssa, before we go on to chelonians and wetlands?
I do not see any right now, no.
Okay. Well, I'll wait 1 minute while I take a drink if anybody has a question about amphibians, and then I'll go on to chelonians.
I do, actually. I was wondering where in the city you're able to find amphibians. I know in wetlands and everything, but like what parts of Lincoln and Omaha have you seen them the most?
Well, they're pretty much wherever we have a vernal wetland. I mean, Heron Haven has 4 or 5 species. Holmes Lake has 4 or 5 species. Piners Park has 4 or 5 species in Lincoln. The big problem in Lincoln, Omaha, and now Grand Island is that bullfrogs have taken over because they're permanent waters, and they weren't permanent waters. So all our native frog tadpoles are distasteful to fish. So they reproduce in what we call vernal ponds that dry up at least every other year. The bullfrog needs permanent waters, and its tadpoles are distasteful to fish. So it can breed in lakes, in farm ponds, and in dammed streams. So it has taken over these areas where we have reservoirs and ponds, and it is eating all the other amphibians in those areas. So the prominent amphibian in urbanized areas, or where we have farm ponds and reservoirs, and where the NRD has dammed the stream, are the bullfrogs, just because of their natural history versus only having streams and vernal ponds.
All right. And then I had a question from a friend of mine who's not currently here, but they wanted me to ask. They work at a pool, and they always see, they think they're sand toads jump into the pool in large numbers, like 20 at a time. Do you know what that's about, or?
Yeah, well, moisture attracts them, and they're probably sensing moisture, and there might not be a large amount of chlorine, but they need to sit in something and absorb water. And the other thing is, they're not that discriminate. Their eyesight is, they're very nearsighted, and they're jumping in a direction, and that's why we catch them what we call drift fences. We put flashing up and put buckets. They go to the fence, they just hop, 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 and fall in the buckets, and that's how we monitor them. So they're hopping, and they're, so let's put it this way. There are no ponds, temporary ponds in Nebraska that have a cement edge. They're all very gradual. So they can gradually go in and gradually come out. You can't do that with a canal or a pool.
Is there any measures you would recommend taking to prevent the habitat loss? Habitat loss.
They can put
dangerous to
yeah, because pools have to have a chain link fence around them to stop juvenile Homo sapiens from drowning, because they have the same tendency. They'll run and drop right in the pool when they're toddlers.
Mm-hmm.
So, same thing. But we have fences to stop that species from drowning. What we can do is we can put flashing straight aluminum in the ground and up about 2 foot in front of the chain link fence and in front of the gate when at night, and then the toads would hit that flashing and go around the pool and not drown in the pool.
Okay, noted.
So that's the defense. It's a lot cheaper than chain link, and yeah, you have to decide whether the cost is, or saving amphibians is worth
It's
it.
a lot easier than diving to the bottom and rescuing 30 frogs at a time, or toads at a time. That's all. I know.
Okay, is that it?
Yeah, make sure to send your guys' questions in the chat whenever.
I see it went from 1 to 5. Do we have some in there now?
Not. Hold on. Do you see a question? Okay, I see a hand. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong section. I don't.
Let's see if I can get to them.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see them now.
Okay. There they
How
are.
visible are the large-scale farming of frogs for human consumption? It's bullfrogs, which are invasive in half the United States, primarily because that's what we consume. So why farm them? They do farm them. Bullfrogs are not declining. They're very hardy, and they are invasive all the way to California, from Colorado to California. And they're invasive actually in Nebraska. I think most of the state. There's some people who argue and say they're only invasive from Highway 81 west. Either way, they're invasive. So I say, get the invasive ones and eat them. Get them out of here. They're eating all the other native species. With the other question, have you found California tigers? I've held California tigers when I was at Berkeley talking with herpetologists. I have not found them in the wild. Actually, I have a student doing a project on them right now, but I have not caught them in the wild. They are threatened. So road salts are no, road salt is not, we tested that, and that's not a problem when it's the salamanders.
Here, the question for that one was asking if road salt is the suspect in the disappearance of salamanders in eastern Nebraska.
Right. Yeah, so road salt is, because where the salamanders are, it's gravel roads, and they use very little salt on gravel roads, and it doesn't make it into their ponds. And so we looked at that, and we did not have any significant results. What do you mean by pH? Oh, okay. So the eastern tiger salamander that is in Ohio, Illinois, and Iowa cannot stand very high alkalinity and does okay at 6, which is a little bit acidic, 6 to 8 pH. Our western tigers that we've been testing don't do well at all below 7. significantly in our studies in growth and longevity. If you think about it, Nebraska is much more alkaline than Iowa, and the salamanders, the western tigers, are doing great where our alkalinity, the pH, is 8 to 8.5 to 9. They're thriving in that pH. However, in a pH of 7.5 to 8.5, like we have in most ponds on the eastern part of the state that are pristine, they're okay, but there's no significant difference. If we put them in water that has become a little more acidic, like where there's heavy agriculture, 6.5 to 7.5, there is a significant mortality in larvae and a significant slowness of growth. We have to do a little more testing to get that robustness on that study. So one of our questions is the western tiger salamander in Nebraska disappearing along the eastern border of the state because it actually was a transition zone from the eastern, and it was a matter of speciation and it's natural extinction? Inquiring minds need to know. You want a master's or a PhD to study that? We'll try to get the money for you. Come see me. Okay. Yeah, you have another question?
A few
here?
more in here.
Yeah. Also, do you release your own salamanders at? No. If we brought them up and they were not used or used as control, we will give them to students to have, so to speak, as educational animals. Those that went to any type of study, they are properly euthanized and placed so someone who wants to challenge our study can go back and find those animals in the museum. So that's just proper protocol. And the other thing is, the eggs we get, as you can imagine, are from the western part of the state. Do we want to bring the genotype from the western part of the state to the eastern part of the state? No. We want to bring them back, but we don't want to do anything that, if they're alleles to that. You know, we have some in the museum that were caught over 17 years ago, so we can look at those alleles, which we have some of the genome printed out. And if there's not a lot of allele change between the ones, say, in Grand Island and the ones in Omaha area, then we may think about trying to seed them back over here on this part of the state, the eastern part of the state. But to be prudent and ethical conservation biologists, we must always check the genome to make sure it's not a dysfunctional translocation or a dysfunctional cross. And in the state of Nebraska, you cannot translocate any amphibian more than 100 yards from where you caught it. That's the regulation in the state of Nebraska. So never move any amphibian and put it back in the wild more than 100 yards from where you caught it. We don't want to play with the alleles. They have enough problem, they're on their own. So,
got a few more. Other than atrazine, any other pesticides or herbicides causing problems? And then the follow-up question was, any known or suspected Monsanto Roundup impact?
Yes. Roundup, actually, I haven't done any studies of Roundup. I know people have, Ryberg, and actually there's more problems with the inert ingredients that make the glyphosate work that cause problems with amphibians, not the amino acid glyphosate. That has some effects, but nowhere near the significant effects as what they call in their ingredients that they must add to that amino acid glyphosate. That's Roundup is one of the brand names. Okay, there's many other brand names. So, and that's not affecting salamanders. We checked that, and that is not an agent. So, oh, we've got more here. Okay, thank you. Makes sense. Okay. You see any I forgot?
Nope, that looks like everything.
Okay. Chelonians, turtles. Okay. So we can go on now. So we have, I don't know if I mentioned it, we have 13 types or species of amphibians, two salamanders, and 11 frogs and toads in Nebraska. We have 9 species of turtles in Nebraska. One is a terrestrial turtle, not a tortoise, a terrestrial turtle, same family, and that's the ornate box turtle. So it doesn't hang around wetlands. But our other 8 turtles are very much aquatic to semi-aquatic. And like the painted turtles, they're heavy aquatic. They will leave the aquatic situation to lay an egg, maybe, 20, 30, 50 foot from the water. So all chelonians, turtles, lay a shelled egg, some calcium, usually not hard, usually leathery, and they lay them in the spring, and they lay them quite a ways from a waterway, and then they return to that waterway. And all those young must return to the water. Now, the painted turtles and the snapping turtles and the red-eared slider that's in Richardson County and Blanding's turtles are laying their eggs away from the water, yet they're doing most of their feeding in the water. So they're getting their energy and toxicants from the water. Then they move and lay an egg from all this energy, which, if it's tetragenic, some of those toxicants can be in the embryo. So they've just moved not only energy, which is an important part of the ecosystem, from the aquatic situation to the terrestrial situation, but they may have moved some toxicants. Now, chelonians, turtles, have a scute, a beta-carotene scute, over bone, and they have scales, beta-carotene scales on their integument. So they're not like amphibians. There's no passage through. They have to drink through their mouth, and they absorb very little through their body. So they're much, much, much hardier to salts in the water and pesticides. I'm in the middle of investigating a 30 turtle kill that occurred 3 weeks ago in the Sandhills of Nebraska on private land. The pond went down, but not enough that it was oxygen went away. But turtles can come up and get oxygen. They have lungs. The water samples are being analyzed right now. But this kill happened in 1 week, and we don't know why. We usually don't see big turtle kills in Nebraska, and and this gentleman owned this acre lake. It's on his property. He ranches. There's cattle. The pond was lower than it normally is, but it's in the Sandhills, so it's probably being fed by the aquifer to some degree. And so we'll have to see. I did notice when the pictures came in that he has mineral blocks for his cattle near the lake, which is common because you want water and mineral block. But he says those mineral blocks have been there for years and years, and the turtles have been there for years and years, because the turtles that came up floating dead were all, older turtles, and they were snappers and painted turtles, primarily painted. And the thing was, there was no signs of predation on these dead turtles. They were intact, upside down, or right side up along the shore, or floating. Don't know. So we may be able to find something. But again, turtles can move toxicants to some degree, but they are moving back and forth. And then those baby turtles go back to the aquatic situation to be food. And on the way back, they're food for the terrestrial situation. So again, a great ecosystem. Just real quickly, I have to shout out the Blanding's turtle, our only tier 1 turtle in the state of Nebraska. We believe, herpetologists across the nation, there's more Blanding's turtles in the state of Nebraska than the whole rest of the world put together. They're critically endangered in New England. They're threatened in Michigan. They're threatened in Minnesota. They're in threatened numbers in Canada. In Nebraska, they are protected because they're globally threatened. But we have a good, stable number in the sandhills of Nebraska. So the populations, from all the data I have collected and all the data I've seen, I mean, just this summer, I was out with some researchers, and we set up, I think, 2 traps in 2 ponds in Brown County. We got, I think, 25 Blanding's turtles in 12 hours in 2 traps. That's good numbers. And they were all marked and released, blood sample taken and immediately released. So we do, yeah, that's a picture of me before I started dyeing my hair gray and white. That was 23 years ago when the corridor for the Blanding's turtle to save them on Highway 83 was put in. Excuse me. Through Valentine's Refuge. Blanding's turtles live a long time, 60, 70 years. They don't become sexually mature until 12 to 20 years of age. Preliminary data of us ultrasounding on site, because we have a portable ultrasound unit, Blanding's turtles to see if they're carrying eggs. My students and I are finding that most of the Blanding's turtles we ultrasound, we believe to be almost 20 to 25 years old that are carrying eggs. So they have to live for 20 to 25 years before they can add to the population. Male Blanding's turtles especially, but also females, travel long distances between pothole and sandhill ponds. This has been data from telemetry that's been done in Nebraska. So most of the places where they are, or were, there's a lot of roads. In Cherry County and Brown County, Nebraska, hardly any roads. And now the main road through their habitat has 4 tunnels and 5 miles of fence to divert them to the tunnels so they don't get hit by cars. Because when they're traveling, a big turtle can tuck in and weather a raccoon, a coyote, and not die. That's how they evolved. They did not evolve to withstand a truck, car, in any way or form. So road mortality is extremely high. And that is one of the reasons they are endangered, except for Nebraska. Soft-shell turtles, very aquatic. They burrow down the sand. We have both the spiny and the smooth. This picture is by Dan Fogel. I get a chance to put that in there. Good friend of mine. This one's also one of his pictures of the yellow mud turtle, which is in the sandhills. These guys move from wetlands to drylands. They only lay 1 egg at a time, 2 eggs a year. And that is kind of, they're adding, different things. And actually the big eater of their eggs is a reptile, which segues into, I'm running out of time. So we do have reptiles, and I know as I'm talking about amphibians and chelonians or turtles, but so since I'm out of time, I won't do my edit on how reptiles are also very important for this. So since we only have 5 minutes left, I'm going to end it there, and I will stop sharing.
All right. Do we have any questions we want to ask? Send them now. I will send out a poll for you guys to fill out now. All right.
And I'll stay on a while. I've got 11 questions, so I'm sure.
Oh, those are questions we've already answered. No, it's just a 3-question poll. It's really quick, and I would really appreciate it if you could fill that out. Not seeing any questions quite yet. Do you have any resources you'd like to share?
Yeah.
Where people can find more information?
Besides those papers, if you want a field guide that is interactive, that you can put right on your smartphone, there you go. It's you can even see what's going on. Look at the right place. There's the QR. Let's see if I get the QR nice and clear. There.
All right. And this will be on YouTube in a couple weeks too. So if you want to go back if you miss it.
Yeah. You can go to the URL, which is below, and the QR. Let's see. Try to get it there. And then it also has an Ask the Expert button. You can send pictures to me, and I already got 5 today. Snakes to identify. So, and there it is. It's just a guide, and we're trying to populate it. I need to get another student to do it. All our research on there too. But we have to watch out because we can't, until our research is robust enough and published, we can't put it on, allow the public to see it. Especially when you're naming toxicants. I don't want to get sued by a chemical company again. I won.
Again. All right, Holly's got a question. She asks, have you ever used Herp Mapper?
What's that?
Holly wants to know if you've ever used Herp Mapper.
No. I don't put anything into iNaturalist or that because herpetologists have problems with people going to their sites and stealing everything. So I have my own database that I have everything come in from Game and Parks and from my site. It was just published in about 3 months ago, or maybe it was almost a year ago, in the Journal of Herpetology, how herpetologists should be very leery about iNaturalist or using anything that is public access, because unlike birds and mammals, people like to, so to speak, steal everything for their own use or reproduction or something like that. So my data is for my students or any other herpetologists that I know in Game and Parks. Otherwise, it's not released. Because I can, find, right here in the labs, we have a gender pair of almost every amphibian, turtle, reptile in the state. So,
what do you suggest for citizen scientists who want to help amphibians and reptiles?
I have several things with Game and Parks, and so we have Nebraska Amphibian Monitoring, and we have training at Schramm Park, Wildcat Hills, Fort Kearney. I've done training, and we'll have many of those this spring. So get on to Game and Parks' site, and you'll get trained by me, and then you'll get your code to get into my website to put data in, and their website. And they watch iNaturalist and they see something that they think is valid, they'll contact me and then I'll contact that person. So you still can, they like to have iNaturalist used, but I just don't do that myself or do Facebook for my lab because there's been problems. Yeah, unfortunately, and 99% of the people will be helpful. But it's that 1% that are not ethical and they want to catch things illegally, because you can't borrow, sell, trade any native amphibian, turtle, or reptile in the state of Nebraska. That's illegal. But they still try to do that to make money. Or they'll catch it and they'll lay eggs in captivity and they think that's okay. It isn't. If you get eggs, even if they're in a body of another animal out of the wild, that's still illegal. They have to be documented by photos and documentation to F2 generation to be sold or traded. And that paperwork has to go with each offspring. That's the legality. How much is it enforced? Not much.
That's a shame that people are doing that. All right, anything else you guys wanted to add? All right, I just want to thank you so much. That was really interesting. And thank you guys all for joining.
Well, have a good evening, and feel free to use the website, and I'll try to make sure we get our lab stuff all up so you can see what's going on. And if you want to help as far as citizen science, as Alyssa said, I started as one of the 5 people who started the Master Naturalist program, and I count on my Master Naturalists, like almost all of those salamander trapping events. I gave each of those Master Naturalists, hundreds of salamander traps, all the equipment they need, and that's from great volunteers. So if you become a Master Naturalist, you'll find out where all my trainings are, or if you trek with Game Parks, and then you can get all that equipment from it. I have problems giving the equipment. The university has problems with me giving hundreds of dollars of equipment to the public unless they are Master Naturalists because of the paperwork they have to sign.
Be a bit risky.
Yeah.
All right. If we don't have anything else, I'm going to sign off for the night. Thank you, everyone. All right, he's going. Bye.